This Volvo is due for a timing belt change. Timing belt's on this side. I need to create some space down here, down the front, and on this side here. First job is to disconnect the negative on the battery. Put a cable tie there to tie the negative cable away from the battery terminal. Taking the engine cover off. Now I need to make a bit of space here. I've got to get to that starter motor. That has to be moved out of the way. So I'm going to take this air pipe off. The starter motor bolts are down there in the bell housing. Disconnected the wiring from the starter motor. You have to take two nuts off. Those are the two nuts. There is a third nut lower down. No need to take that one off. So that stays in place. It's awkward to get to those nuts because they are hidden inside this plastic terminal housing. Now I need to take the bolts out on the bell housing. Move this air filter to get to that. Move the air filter out of the way. This wiring harness will need springing away. There was one bracket there which I've undone. Need a 10mm spanner to undo that nut. Now there's 3 bolts into the end of the starter motor through the bell housing there. You can see 2 of them. There's another one hidden behind that wire. So they've got to come out. And then the starter motor should be free. I've got the starter motor off. That drops down through the bottom. That's the starter motor. It's held onto the bell housing with 3 bolts. 13mm socket needed for those. These are the 2 terminals that have to be undone. That's an M6, so that's a 10mm socket needed for that. And then M8, 13mm socket needed for that. Put those back on so they don't get lost. The reason for taking the starter motor off is because you have to get to this area here to insert a timing peg through the end of the crankcase into the flywheel. So there you can see the ring gear on the flywheel, and just there through the end flange of the crankcase there's a hole. So there's an 8mm diameter peg is inserted through that hole, and it locates in a hole in the flywheel, and that sets number 1 piston at top dead centre. I've made the flywheel timing peg. This end goes into the flywheel. It's 8mm diameter rod, and it sets the flywheel so that number one piston is at top dead centre. Now I also need to make a flywheel locking tool that securely locks the flywheel to stop the engine turning whilst I'm undoing the crankshaft pulley bolt and tightening the bolt back up again. I've cut 3 teeth into this mild steel. The mild steel is 6mm thick. I've got an old flywheel here which I used as a pattern, so those 3 teeth will engage in the ring gear, and I shall need to weld that onto this steel plate. There, and this plate will need 2 holes in it. That's the flywheel locking tool made. I now need to create some space on this side of the engine to get to the timing belt. Timing belt's inside that cover there. This engine mounting has got to come out of the way. This header tank's got to come out of the way. The engine will have to be supported. I've got my lifting hoist set up, so that chain has got to be attached to that lifting eye, and that'll be taking the weight of the engine when this engine mounting is moved. I've moved the header tank away. The header tank just slots onto that bracket there, and another one under here, that one there. It just slots down onto it. It's just a matter of lifting it up. Taken 2 bolts out of the timing cover, one here, one just down there, and a nut near the bottom. So now the timing belt cover should just lift out. Right, I've got the timing belt cover off. That's the cover. Came up through this space here. Wasn't easy because near the bottom of the cover, this lug here gets caught underneath a bracket down the bottom there. Now I'm going to make myself another timing tool that's needed to lock the camshaft sprocket in position. So in that hole there through the camshaft sprocket, it needs an 8mm diameter rod pushing through, which locates in a corresponding hole in the cylinder head. I've made the timing pin for the camshaft sprocket and got that in position. Now I need to fit the flywheel locking tool I've made to stop the engine turning while I undo the crankshaft pulley bolt. That's the flywheel locking tool in place. Before undoing the crankshaft pulley bolt, I've got to take the auxiliary belt off. This is a special tool I made some time ago. $16. 17. $18. $18.25. I've taken the crankshaft pulley bolt out. Now what I did before taking it out, I scribed a line across the head of the bolt, across there. That line was horizontal, and where the ink mark is was towards the front. Now I counted the turns taking the bolt out, and it was 18.25 full turns to get the bolt out. So to get the torque setting, it's done in 2 stages normally if you're using a new bolt. First stage is 52 foot-pounds. Second stage is a further 60 degrees rotation. So my theory is, if I tighten that bolt up 18.25 turns, it should be okay. I've now taken the engine mounting off. That's it there. Now I need to take the lower timing belt cover off. To get this sensor ring off the crankshaft, I'm going to have to ease it off, I think, with a slide hammer. There are 2 threaded holes there for M6. So I've made up this little bracket which I'm going to bolt onto the face of it. I'll attach my slide hammer to that and try and ease it off. Moved it back. That's it. That's done. I'll move this sensor, it just gives a bit more room. I always screw the bolts back in place and you don't lose them. Right, I got the belt marked against one of the teeth on the camshaft sprocket, and the same again on the crankshaft sprocket down the bottom there. Now I need to take the belt off. I'm going to slacken the tension pulley, which is this one here. Both timing pins are in place, this one in the camshaft sprocket and the one in the flywheel. Got the belt off and the tension pulley. That's the belt and the tension pulley. Now I've got to get the idle pulley off, which is behind this casting. So there's 4 bolts. Hold this on. I've got them loose. That one there goes through the middle of the idle pulley. I've got that casting off, which is the engine mounting bracket. And that's the idle pulley, which is inside of it. So that was the top. And inside that you've got your idle pulley. Now the other thing I'm going to do, this sprocket here drives the water pump, and it makes sense to change the water pump when you're doing the belt, because these can leak the shaft seal. So I've got a new water pump in the time belt kit, so I'm going to be changing that. The downside of that is you've got to drain all the water out before you do it. Water pump is off. That's held in place with 5 little set screws. That's the water pump. That's the old belt. And that's the new one. There's the mark I made on the top of the old belt. And there's the mark underneath. Between those 2 marks on the belt, there are 51 teeth. and on this side there are 65. So we put a mark on the new belt, counted 51 teeth and put another mark on the belt. If I get those marks in line with the marks on the sprockets, then it's got to be right. That's the new tension pulley. That's the old one. New idle pulley. Old idle pulley. New water pump. Complete with new gasket. Got the new timing belt on. Starting to put things back together. That sensor goes on there. That's the timing belt cover. Sensor ring. Right, I've got the crankshaft pulley on and tightened the bolt up. And I've also checked the belt tension indicator, which is there, and that's exactly where it should be, in the adjustment window. That's the pointer there, and then the adjustment window is just behind it. I can now get the top half of the timing belt cover back on and get the engine mounting bolted back into place. Everything back together again. I've also flushed the cooling system out and added some fresh antifreeze. Just needs topping up a little bit. And that's an air job done.